Hi, I'm James Williams and welcome back to my channel. In this video I want to focus on XPath expressions, which are a really powerful tool at your disposal in Power Automate that lets you run queries against data, and in doing so you can do some quite sophisticated manipulation of data within Power Automate without using any premium connectors and often without the need to do any apply to each loops, which will keep your flows running as efficiently as possible. We used some XPath in the last video on this channel where we took the outputs of two forms API calls and we used XPath to combine the data and then do some clever manipulation to determine the score for a Microsoft Forms quiz. In this video we're going to cover how to write and build and test XPath expressions Automate, and to do that we're going to run through a few examples of how you can manipulate data. So those examples will be how to group and ungroup data using XPath expressions, how to do a lookup of data, or how to merge two data sources, and lastly we're going to look at how to do some numerical calculations using XPath in Power Automate. If you like what you see in this video, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. And without further ado, let's get into it. So let's jump over into Power Automate and take a look at this flow which we're going to run through today, which will demonstrate these various uses of XPath expressions in Power Automate. Now the start of this flow is this data scope here, which is just emulating getting data into a Power Automate flow from another source. So these are just three compose actions, but in reality you could have got this data from a separate system via a connector into Power Automate. So here in this first compose object we've got a body property and under that a customers property, which is an array of customers, and each customer has a customer ID, and under that they have an orders property, which is itself an array of orders that that customer has made. Each order has an order number, and then another array under that called line items, which are all the items they ordered on that particular order. Each line item has a product ID and a quantity, the number of that product that they ordered on that order. So all this is all well and good, but it's only got IDs in it, so alone this doesn't mean very much. So we've got two other compose objects here, compose actions here. The first is a list of customers. So for each customer we've got their ID, that ties back to the ID in the other action, and then also we have the name of that customer and their email address. And then in the last compose action we've got a list of products. So again we've got an ID, the ID from the first action, but as well as the ID for each product we've got that product's name. So in this video we're going to take this data and using various XPath expressions we're going to go through all these actions and manipulate that data, which will help us investigate it in some way. Now XPath expressions only run against XML objects, and our data isn't in XML format at the moment. So at every point where we've got a data output in this flow, I've also done a parallel branch where I've extracted that particular XML, and this allows us to take that XML and put it into another tool in order to try and come up with those XPath expressions that we can use. So here's an example in the first instance of us taking the outputs from that customer data action, that first compose action, and getting the body property of it, which of course under that is the array of customers, and we've added that to a blank JSON object, and we've named that as a property called root. So in this new object we'll have a property called root, and under that we'll have a property called customers, and that customers will be of course an array of customers. What you can't do in XML is have an array as the first object, so that's why we've only got the body here. We haven't gone all the way down into customers. So we've built that object using a Power Automate expression, and then we've wrapped it in the XML function, and that will return us the XML for that data, which we can then use. So here we are at the output of that XML expression. And we can see that we've got our root node at the start, and then an array of customers objects. So there'll be multiple of these customers tags and a closing tag to go with them. This is why you can't have an array as the topmost object in an XML, because there needs to be just one root, one closing root tag at the start and end of the XML. So now that we've got our XML, we can use this to try and come up with our XPath expression to analyze this data. And it's often best to do this outside of Power Automate, because it's sometimes quite difficult to come up with the correct XPath expression straight away. So you'll want to go through a process of testing as you come up with your XPath expressions in order to come up with the right one. And often the way you'll see that done is you can copy the XML out of Power Automate and then take it into a tool like xpather.com, where you can paste it in. I generally avoid using the format button here, which makes it look nice, but sometimes actually breaks the functionality. But once that XML is in there, you can start typing away and try and come up with an XPath expression. So you can either start exploring from the root node and then onwards. Just be careful that XPath is case sensitive. So I needed a capital C there to match my XML. So you can see that I've found the customers object there under the root object. It's given me back some very strange looking outputs, but this is all the text within every property within those customer objects. So sometimes it's more helpful to click on this node tab to see what's going on a bit clearer. So here's all my customers, and under the customers all their orders. I didn't have to explore it like this, going via the root object and downwards. If you put 2 slashes, you can jump to any level of node within your XML, which can be helpful. And this is where generally you'll see people putting together some XPath expressions and then copying the XPath back into Power Automate to run. But there's a problem with that, which I'll demonstrate now. Let's say we wanted to get some information about the quantity of products ordered against each line item. So we'll try to get some sort of number out of this, and let's say we want that to be the average quantity per order. So we can see here that XPath tells us that the average quantity per order, according to my data, is 1.125. So that's great. Let's try and replicate that in Power Automate. So I'll copy that XPath expression and take it into this tiny flow I've got here, where I've got the output of that XML action. So that is my XPath expression, my XML data, and then the second part, the second parameter to the XPath function here, is the actual XPath expression you want to use. So I'll paste that in. If I update that and save, I test this, hopefully it will give me back the average. But it seems like this flow has failed. And according to the error message at the top, it says the template language function XPath parameters are invalid. The XPath parameter must be a supported, well-formed XPath expression, which it was according to XPather. It says, please see this URL for usage details. So let's go to that URL. Reference guide to workflow expressions in logic apps. So here we are. Here's the definition of our XPath function. And we can see here there's a big note that says, in consumption and standard logic apps, which applies also to Power Automate, all function expressions use the .NET XPath library. XPath expressions are compatible with the underlying .NET library and support only the expression that the underlying .NET library supports. So it seems that xpather.com supports a wider range of XPath expressions than Power Automate. So really, we need a tool to test our XPath expressions with the same level of compatibility, so that we're not tricked into thinking a particular XPath expression would work when it wouldn't. So one way of testing out XPath expressions that's compatible with Power Automate is to download the free Visual Studio community. making sure that when you install it, you enable .NET Desktop development. If you do that, you can create a new project in Visual Studio of the type console app, C# console app. And here's one I've made earlier, and I got this code from Copilot. I didn't write it myself because I'm not a C# developer. But here I've taken the XML and I've put it in a file on my system. So here's the order data by customer XML file, which I've copied out of Power Automate. So there's that XML nicely formatted there by Edge. And here back in the program, it takes that XML from the file and it takes an XPath expression that's here in the form of a string variable. And when I run with F5 this program, it will build that and show me on the screen the output in the same format that the Node tab did on xpather.com for that particular expression. So let's try that expression that didn't work successfully in Power Automate. You can see here that there's been an exception. So it's saying here that the query, the XPath query, has a prefix variable or user-defined function, which basically means that the function we've used, in this case the AVG average function, wasn't recognized by the .NET XPath implementation, which is the same issue we found in Power Automate. So this seems, if we test it here, we can come up with working XPath expressions, and hopefully we'll be able to successfully copy those over into Power Automate and expect them to still work. So how do we find out what expressions we can actually use? Well, if we go to this URL, which I will put in the description below, this is the definition, the reference for the .NET implementation of XPath. So this is a really useful page to familiarize yourselves with. It will tell you all the sorts of things you can do. There's some great examples. There's some examples of how you can select particular nodes within XPath. Also, there's a section here called XPath functions. And if I expand out some of these, you can see that these are the kind of functions that you can use within Power Automate. So you can see within number, there's no average, but there is a sum that I can use. There's a count function to count nodes, various string functions. So some really useful stuff in here that we'll be able to implement in our flow. So back in Power Automate and in the flow editor, the first thing we're going to try and do is add in the product details by using this product ID into the line items objects. So to do that, we're first going to ungroup this data, which is already grouped by first customers and then by orders. And then you only have line items under that. We're going to ungroup, also known as explode, that data. So we instead just have an array of line items. And because we don't want to lose the context we were in, we don't want to lose what the customer ID was, we don't want to lose what the order ID was, we're going to have to not only return the array of line items, but also we want to add in those details into the line items objects. So we're going to do this as usual with a select action, which avoids the need for an apply to each loop and will keep our flow running nicely and efficiently. But we can't just input this customers array into the select action, because the select action can't change the number of items, the number of elements in that array. It can only remap each item into a new format. So if we want to have a select action that outputs the complete array of line items ungrouped, we need to know how many line items there are to begin with. And we can do that using XPath. So in our test XPath environment here, we already know that this expression, line items, produces the full array of line items. And in order to get the count of those nodes, we can wrap that expression in the count function, the count XPath function. So if we run that again, we'll see that we got 40. So here in our first action using XPath in our Power Automate flow, where we're ungrouping the customer data, the customer order data, we're using as the from input to our select action this expression, which creates a sequence of numbers starting with 1 and finishing with the count of the line items. So there's the XPath expression, or the XPath function within Power Automate. This is the XML that we've used to take the order data by customer object and the body property of that, wrapped it in a root object, and we've created the XML. And now we've run that same expression that we've just tested in Visual Studio. That will give us 40. We've wrapped that in an int function so that we get the number 40. And then we've asked Power Automate to give us a range of numbers from 1 to 40 in this case as the input to our select action. So if I jump over into the results for this flow, you can see that that from parameter for the select is now all the numbers from 1 to 40. So how do we use that number to access the information about line items? Well, here back in Visual Studio, we know that this line items expression gives us back the full list of line items. So we might try, say, accessing the 40th line item by using this index expression here. But when I run that, it doesn't return anything at all. And that's because there's not 40 line items on any one order. Whereas if I put, say, a 1 in here, I do get a result. And in fact, I get all the first line item results from every single order. So that's not what we want either. What we actually want is the index into the finished array of node sets. So once XPath has returned that line items node set array, we can wrap that in brackets and then index into it. And if I run this now, we get just one item, which is great. And then if I change that to 40, we should in theory get the very last of our, the very last of our 40 line items. So the problem with this is that I've lost already that context. I've lost the customer number and I've lost the order number associated with this line item. So how can I get that back? Well, XPath hasn't lost that context. So at the end of this expression, once I've got this 40th line items node, I can actually explore back into its parent's node. So if I just do a slash and then 2 dots and run this again, we can see that it's taken me back up into the order that line item was a part of. And obviously that order has an order number property. So now if I explore into that order object and get the order number, I can run that again. That gives me back the order number node. And then to get the text of that back into Power Automate, I can stick a text function on the end. And there you can see that will return to Power Automate just the order number. So I can also use the number of the line item to get back the order number as well as the actual line item object. Now I could go back further up the chain using the same approach with another ... to get back up to the customer's level, but instead I'm going to demonstrate another way of reaching that customer node above the line item, and that is by using the ancestor expression here. So ancestor 2 colons and then the name of the node I'm looking for, which is customers. If I run that, I can see it's also got me that customer object, and I don't need to know how many steps up the chain it was back up to that object. So again, if I do an expression to go into that customer ID property of the customers node and get the text, I should get the customer number associated with that node and with that line item object. So back in Power Automate, using that array of numbers, I can then use the map property of the select action, and I've basically built up a new object where I've used all those various expressions to pull together an object in the format that I want to see. So the first thing I've done right in the middle here is that I've used XPath to take that number, which is the index of the line items, and build that into the line items expression I first use. So you can see that the line items expression there is wrapped in the brackets. After that, we've got the square brackets, and we've broken up the text string there because we're concatenating it with the item, which in this case is the index, that number from 1 to 40. Then we've closed the square brackets back in another text literal here, and there's our complete expression. So that's the XPath expression, and that gives us back a XPath result, which in this case will be a base 64 encoded string. I'll just demonstrate that by getting rid of everything else in this expression for now. I'll just click update and I will save and test this. And we can see now the flows failed later on, but in this explode action output, we now have an array. So this array is an array of all 40 of the line item objects that are being returned by that XPath expression. We've got 40 items in our array in the input to our select action, which is why we've got 40 responses. But we're only concerned with, in each case, only each item in the array of the output, which is an object with two properties, one's content type and one's content. So this content here is the base 64 encoded version of our node, our line item node. And in fact, if we take this, we can paste it in over at base64decode.org, and we can see that it's giving us back that XML line item object. So here I am back in the flow before I amended, before I took out the rest of it. So you can see the first thing I did was I got the first item in the array, which was returned from the XPath object, and then I got the content property of that. So that was that base 64 encoded version of the XML. Then I've turned that into a normal XML string using the base 64 toString function. And then I've wrapped that in an XML function, which turns it back into a proper XML object within Power Automate. And lastly, I've wrapped that in a JSON function, which turns it back into a native object within Power Automate. From that, I've then explored into the line items property, which gives me back the complete line item for that particular index number which we started with. So that's the first object we've got, and then we want to add back in those other values, the order number and the customer number, the customer ID. So to do that, I've used two add property functions. In the first one, I'm adding in the order number, where I'm using the same approach to do an XPath expression, where I've taken the XML, the original XML, and I've this time used the same start of the XPath expression, but I've added in that / ... to go back up into the order node, and then I've got the order number property, and I've returned the text from it. XPath will always return an array, so I've got the first item in that array, which is just the order number, and that's what gets assigned back to that order number property. And then to this object, I've added the final property, which is the customer ID, and that's exactly the same, except the expression is that final one where we've got the ancestor customers node, and we've gone into the customer ID property, and then we've got the text from that. And here's the output of that action. So now we can see we've got an array which will be 40 items long, and each one is a complete line item object that not only includes the original details, but now also includes the order number and the customer ID that was related to that line item. So the next thing we're going to do, now that we've got an array of line items, each with a product ID, is we're going to try and pull in the product name using this ID into this object. So to do that, if I go back into my flow editor, we've already got the product data, and in here the products array has both the IDs and the names of each product. So in XPath, I can use the XML output of that action and the following XPath expression to look at any particular product. So this gives me the full set of products. This lets me filter for the product with a particular ID, in this case 1, and then I'm going to get the name property of that product node, and I'm going to return the text for that. So if I just do a quick test, you can see that comes back with smartphone. So back in the flow, after the explode or ungroup action, I've done this lookup action where the output is simply the output from the previous select action, and in this case we're adding a new property to each item in that array, and we're going to call it product name, and it's that same layout where we've used the XPath function here with the XML output from the previous action. So you can see here I've updated this to be the outputs from product data. Sorry, not the previous action, but the product data. And I've put that expression in that I've tested in Visual Studio. And once again, I've broken it up so that ID for a product is dynamic, coming from the item in the select. And because of that, I've had to break up the expression and reform it using the concat function, which is what these three apostrophes are doing here, these 3 quote marks. So there, where you see a double quote inside a text string here, that is escaping that quote character, so that will only be interpreted as one quote within the text string, but it won't terminate that text string. So the complete text literal goes from there to there, and the last single character of that bit of text is a quote. That's amalgamated with the ID, and then the same sort of thing, put another quote back into the expression, and then the remainder of the XPath expression. So that concat combines to make an expression in this sort of format, and then we can see that the output of this select action is what we want. So we started with the line item with the order number, and the customer ID built in, and then we ended up with the same object but with a new property, product name, and in this case it's smartphone, and there's headphones, and so on. So that's worked. So now I'm going to demonstrate how to group those exploded line items back together again. We're going to do this in 2 stages. The first stage is where we're going to group it back into each order. So we'll have an array of line items associated with a particular order. And we're going to do this in a very similar way to the way we ungroup the data. So the first and most important thing is to start with a input to our select action with the same number of items in the array as the desired output. So in this case, we need an array that is as long as all of the individual orders. So we can do that now by looking at the output of the previous step, which I've converted into XML and put into this file. If we look for all the order number nodes in that and have a look at the result, we can see that we get all the order numbers as individual nodes. And once again, we can add the /text and then brackets, and that will give us back an array of all the order numbers in our new data. But you can see here that there's duplications, and that's because we've got this is starting with the array of line items, and now that we've added that order number into all of those line items, some orders that had more than one line item on that order will have multiple items returns in this array. So we need to reduce this back down to only the unique order numbers. And we can do that in Power Automate with the Power Automate expression by taking the result of that XPath expression, where we've got the list of order numbers, and putting it twice into a union function. So the union function will combine both of these arrays and give us back only the unique keys. So because this is the same array, it basically whittles it down to a list of unique order numbers. And we can see that in the output of this group action. So here we are with again the list of 20 unique order numbers. So how do we take these order numbers and use them to regroup the line items? Well, it's a very similar approach to the approach we took when we ungrouped, and we took the index of a particular line item and we retrieved that line item using XPath. And then we took the content, the base 64 encoded content that came back from XPath, and we used that to get back an object with a line item property. However, in this case, the XPath, which will be similar to this, where we're getting all the line items where that order number is a particular value, which will give us back an array of line item nodes. So it's slightly different in that we can't just use the first function here to get the first bit of base 64 encoded content. But we have seen this pattern before in the previous video, where we got back an array and using the following bit of string replacing, we managed to take the array of base 64 encoded strings and combine them together, and then we could run that base 64 to string function around that to get back the re-amalgamated XML object. I'm not going to go over it in great detail here, but if you're interested in how this section of the expression works, please do go watch that previous video. I'll put a link to it down in the description, and it's the chapter on the nested select that you'll be interested in. But basically this returns the array of line items associated with the order that we've extracted using that central XPath expression. So this is part of a wider expression here, where we've started with the order number, which is item in this case, and we've created an object with that as its property, order number, and the value of the order number is the order number from the input to the select. We've added to that object another property called customer ID, and we've used some XPath we've already seen here to get the value of that customer ID, and put that into the current item. And then we've added a new property called line items, and that will be this returned array of line items that comes back as a result of the XPath expression. So here's the result of that group action. Now we can see that we're back to a list of orders. We've got an order number. We've still got the customer ID, which we'll use in a second to group these items again into customers. But then we've got the array of line items. So in this first order, there are 2 line items. Those are the objects we previously ungrouped and added those product name properties to. And the next step of the flow, which I won't go through in detail, is another grouping. This time, rather than being based around the order numbers, we're getting a unique list of customer IDs out of our new object. And then again, we're building up a new item with the customer ID property first. And then to that, we're adding a property called orders. And in this case, orders is the array of orders associated with that customer that has come back from an XPath expression that returns an array of nodes. So we get the array of base 64 encoded XML strings. We amalgamate them together using these replace functions, and then we unencode it, add it back into a root object, convert it into an XML object and back into a proper object, a native object within Power Automate, and we extract that root orders property. So if we go and have a look in the output of that action, we can see what it looks like. So here's group 2. So these are the unique customer numbers, 1 to 10. And then in the outputs we have back grouped into customers. Each customer has an array of orders. So there's the orders for customer 1, and each order still has its internal array of line items that were grouped in the previous step. So now in the last step of manipulation of this data that I want to do, now we've got it regrouped as each individual customer. I'm going to try and add in this additional customer data by looking up the ID of the customer and pulling back these two values. Now we could just do 2 lots of the lookup step we did before. So we could look at the name and add that to a property, and we could look up the email and add that to a property. But if there were loads of different properties in here, then that would take a long time. It would be a very complicated expression. So I want to see if there's a way of doing all of that in one step and just bringing all the additional properties from this object back into the other object. The way I've done that in this select action, which I've called merge, is I've just taken the output of the previous group 2 select action, and I've used this expression to produce an output. So what happens here is, rather than taking the current item and adding a property to it, I've converted it into a JSON string representation of the complete object, and then I've concatenated that with the string representation of the object that is the customer node looked up from the outputs of the customer data action right at the top of the flow. So as usual, we've converted it into XML. We've put an XPath expression on it so that we get the particular customer based on their ID. We've got the first item in an array because XPath will always return an array. And we've taken the content property of that, which is the base 64 encoded string. And we've converted that from base 64 into an XML string, and we've converted that into an XML object. And once again, we've converted that back into a native object using JSON, and we've got the customer's property out of that. So this is an object that represents the customer. So now we've got 2 strings concatenated together of 2 different objects. One's the customer data in terms of what their orders were, and one's the customer data in terms of their personal details. So let's see what that looks like before I show you the rest of this step. So if I just trim out the outside there, update that, and save and test the flow, we'll see what those combined objects in JSON string format look like. So if I go to the output of the merge action, we can see that the input was the previous steps items, and the output is a collection of strings. So it might be easier to see on this side. So we've got an array that's the same length as all of the customers, and in each one we've got a string that is a concatenation of first the customer and all their line items put together. So here's some more line items for that customer, customer 1. Then at the end of that object, which finishes with the curly brace closing, we've immediately got a curly brace opening, which is the next object we've converted into a JSON string, which is the information about that customer. and then there with this double quotes here is the full concatenated string. So we've got one of these for each customer, showing all of their products and all of their details at the bottom. So what we want to do is take out this closing brace and this opening brace and replace it with a comma, which will have the effect that these additional properties here, these keys and values, will be added to one larger object. So as long as none of these property names clash, so ID doesn't clash because here it was customer ID, and name doesn't clash with anything else, and email doesn't clash with anything else. So as long as they're unique, we can combine that back into one big object and run that through a JSON function, which will produce a native object type from that information. So back in my flow editor, if I replace that full expression back in there, so I've taken the concatenated string and I've replaced the closing and opening curly braces with a comma, and then I've wrapped that in a JSON object. So if I now update this back to the original expression and then test it again, we should see this time, rather than a string representation of two objects combined into one in the output, we should see we've got proper objects again, native object types. So we've got the customer ID and orders like we had originally, but after the orders, so there's order number 2, we also have the details combined from the other piece of incoming data, which was the customer's data table. So the last thing that we're going to do, now that we've combined all that data into one merge data set, is ask some questions about it and do some calculations using the numerical functions in XPath. So to help with that, I've produced some XML from the merged data. This is the expression I've used. So I've added the root property and a customer's property under that, and the that property is the array of customers, which we're getting from the body of that merge select action. So here's that output XML, which I've copied into a file on my computer called aftermerge.xml. So the first question we're going to answer is an easy one. How many customers have we got? Well, we can do that with this XPath expression. So we're getting all the customers nodes in the XML, and then we're going to just count them. So if I run that, we can see that we get 10 results. So that's all 10 original customers. So they've survived the process intact. So we've done a count. Next, we're going to do a sum. So we're going to sum the headphones that have been bought by John Doe. So now that we've combined the product information and the customer information into one object, we've got both of these properties in our data that we can use to do this calculation. So the expression is slightly more complicated than just a sum, because first we're going into the customers node and we're filtering for customers where the name equals John Doe. So that will give us one customer node back. And then within that customer node, we're using the double slash, which remember skips down to any level without having to go through the intermediate levels. And we're getting any node where the product name property is equal to headphones. So any node here will obviously be a line item, because only the line items have a property called product name. So this will give us back all the line items that John Doe has on his orders where he's ordered headphones. And then from those nodes that are returned, we're getting the quantity of headphones that he's ordered. And that might return a multiple number of nodes. So we're wrapping that in a sum function, which will give us the sum of the quantity across all those nodes. So for John Doe, it turns out he's ordered 2 headphones. And then lastly, we're going to do an average. And if you remember, the average function wasn't available in .NET. So we've had to do it the old-fashioned way, which is get the total and divide it by the number of items. So here I've answered the question, what's the average quantity of items across all orders? So to do that, I've used the following XPath expression. So we've taken the sum of all the quantities across all the orders. So this will give us every number of every item ordered, and we've summed that up here. And then we're going to divide that, because we can do division in XPath, by the total number of orders, so the count of all the order nodes. So if we run that, see that the average number of items ordered per order is 2 1/4. So here are those actions over in Power Automate. So first for count, which was the most straightforward one, we've got the XPath function and we've got the XML output from the previous action. So this is going to be the same across all three numerical calculation actions. And in this one, we've just got the count of customers. So if we look at the results, we've got 10, which was correct. In the next action, the sum, we took the XML and then we put in that more complicated XPath expression. We've only put double quotes in here. There's not the 3 because we're still within one text literal here, but we're not concatenating it. So we're not ending one part of the string here and then putting in a dynamic name. We're just putting in a fixed name here, John Doe, the same for headphones. So we just need the double quotes, which will be converted into one quote in the resulting expression. So that's that sum expression, and the output of that in the results is 2, which is correct. And then lastly, in the average box, again, it's a slightly simpler one because there's no quotes to worry about, but there's the expression. And in the output of the average action, it actually says no outputs there, but if I go and show the raw outputs, I can see that that's come back as 2.25. So that's it. We covered everything we meant to. So we figured out how to write and properly test XPath expressions, which we can then be confident we can use over in Power Automate. And we then did a lot of data manipulation where we worked through some examples of grouping and ungrouping data. We did a lookup of a particular value. We did a merge of a whole object with another, all using XPath. And then with the data in the state we wanted it in, we did some numeric calculations, in this case, which were counts, sums, and even an average using XPath. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. A bit of a shorter one this time, thankfully. If you liked it though, please do like and subscribe to the channel. I'll put a link down below to the XPath syntax reference and to my previous video in which we discussed in a bit more detail the nested select, which is returning an array from XPath, an array of node sets, and converting that back into a usable object. So all that leaves for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you again soon. See you later, Automator.